Good morning, everybody. It is I, returning from the lurgy, Julia from Crosspatch. Happy sunny day. Don't know where you are, but it's boiling here, so I'm doing this really early this morning before it gets too hot in here. And today we are going to make little messenger bags. Now, you don't need the pattern unless you want the actual applique bits that are on it, because you can make it just from 2.5-inch squares. So you're putting 2.5-inch squares together. That gives you your measurements, so it makes it really easy to make. So here's the first one that I made, and I've got two others in various stages of construction to show you how I made it. So it's just a little, it'll go across your body, crossbody bag, with a little flap. The flap can be that side or it can be the other side. Just a little bag when you're going out, walking the dog, put your phone in and a few doggy treats. So this one is doggy themed, and I've used some really pretty Japanese fabric. So this is pretending patchwork fabric, and then the rest is made up of 2.5-inch squares that I've cut little mini charms of. However, you can make the whole bag, obviously, just using 2.5-inch charms. It's got a little gusset in the side, but that's really easy to put in because you just match up the squares. So if you're using 2.5-inch squares, it makes it easier to put it in, put the gusset in, and to make up, because you can just match up where the squares go. And then the handles, the measurement for the handles, there's 2 handles and each one is 30 inches long, and that makes a good crossbody size, and it'll just sort of sit over your hips, and then just tie a little knot in the end. Okay, so that's the little doggy version. So that's it fully made up. I've just quilted it simply using a crosshatch. I used some H630 on this one simply because I was using what was left in the shed. But H640 is a bit more sturdy, it's a bit thicker. So when you make your bag up, you can use pretending patchwork fabric, you can use just squares, or you can use some linen. So in the pattern you will get templates. So there's a template for the dog, which is on the doggy bag, there's a bunny, and there's a little foxy. So you can applique these, or you can just stitch them. It's entirely up to you. Okay, so on the little foxy sample that I've done, I've just stitched him using my favourite Valdani thread, of course, the S303 I've used on that one. If you're not using squares for the front, so on the front of the bag you've got 4 squares across by 5 squares up is your front panel. Okay, so basically that will be 8.5 inches by 10.5 inches will be the size of the front of your bag. Now if you're doing the linen, cut your linen, and you're going to do some quilting and stuff on it, cut it a bit bigger. So I cut this 9 by 11, and then I trimmed it down afterwards. Now I fused my linen to the wadding before I stitched it, just to add a bit of, strength to it, so you don't see the stitching through the back, etc. So I fused the wadding to the back and I stitched it. Now tracing the stitchery on, I just use a light box, and I usually use a gel pen or a pencil. When I do the cross hatching, I know there's a guide on my sewing machine, but my eyes are pretty chronic, so I like to draw a line. So I usually draw it with a pencil so I can see where I'm sewing. Okay, so do your front panel first. So either do your piece of linen, which you will cut down to 8.5 by 10.5, or do your rows of fabric. So 4 wide by 5 high. Okay, now on the back you're going to do the same, so 4 by 5, then you're going to add 6 squares onto the top to make your little flap. Now decide which side you want to sew those squares as to where the flap is going to fold over on the front. So that one, I've got that folding over that side. On the doggy one, it's on the other side. Really doesn't make any difference, to be honest. The other thing you need to remember is that when you fold this flap over to the front of your bag, if you've got some feature prints like in the little foxy one, you don't want your foxes upside down. So remember, when you're putting this together, to put the foxes in the panel are going to be facing the other way to the foxes on the back. See what I mean? So when I fold that over, I don't want my owl upside down. All you do to shape the end, so the 3 bits on the end, just fold it in half and trim the corners off. I just use a roll of sellotape and draw around it and cut it off. Obviously in the pattern you've got a template if you're in the UK and you want the pattern, but you don't necessarily need that, okay? So that's the end, how you do the end. And before you put the bag together, there's a little loop to go around the button. And again, if you're using tape measure tape, remember that to sew it on, you're sewing your loop on, it's 6-inch piece of tape. Sew it on upside down with the correct side of the tape against the correct side of the bag, because when you fold it out to go over your button, you want to see the tape, you don't want to see the white bit. Not that I've done it the wrong way around many times. Now all your gusset is your 2.5-inch squares again. So because the main body of your bag is 5 squares down, so you've got 5 squares down that side and then 4 squares across the bottom and 5 up the other side. So just sew them together, fuse them to some wadding, and then just stitch it onto your panel. Now when you're stitching the gusset on, stop 1/4 inch before the bottom corner, just fold it back like so and then carry on across the bottom. Stop 1/4 inch before there, fold it back down and sew up the side, and then do the same when you're sewing this panel in. Now when I've put this bag together, I'll put a picture on here so you can see the picture in my posts community section, or whatever YouTube calls it. So that's how you put your bag together. Obviously the lining is exactly the same measurements. So the lining, you've got a piece 8.5 by 10.5. You've got, I normally cut the gusset, if I cut it in one piece, I cut it 30 inches by 2.5 and then I trim off any excess. However, I have discovered if you make your gusset into pieces, so if you cut, I know it's the same fabric, but cut 3 pieces, cut 2 that are 10.5 by 2.5 and 1 that's 8.5 by 2.5, because then when you get to the corners, so I did it on this one, this is going to be the lining for the Foxy bag, when you get to the corners you know where they should be, if you know what I mean. So you're not sort of sewing blind as such, because you've got no squares to guide you. So I find it easier to put the gusset in that way. Okay, so here's the lining I've made up. Now you make the back of your lining about 2 inches bigger than it needs to be. So I've done it 8.5 wide by, I think I did it 16.5, so that you leave your lining, when you've made your lining, lean it inside out, make sure you've left a hole in it somewhere for turning. So I've left a hole in the side there, so when I turn the bag through there's a hole there. Here's my finished bag. I'm going to put that inside the lining like so. I'm trying not to sniff desperately. And then you can pin it and sew it all around the top edge and then trim it off afterwards, okay, just so that you get the correct size, and make sure that little bit's tucked in so you don't sew it to the lining. Okay, so you will sew this all around the top edge, making sure you're matching the gusset bits. So when you want to turn it out, because when you're stitching this bit on the corner here, just trim it in the corners so that it turns out nicely, otherwise it'll pull when you're turning it. So all you're going to do is stitch all the way around the top and all the way around there, and then you'll pull it right sides out through the gap there and just tuck the lining back into the bag. So you've tucked the lining back into the bag, and then you can just top stitch around the edges, so about 1/8 inch in, if I hold it a bit nearer the camera, top stitch all around the outer edges, and that also holds that little tab in place. And then when you're finished you can sew a little button. I've used a self-cover button to put on the front underneath where that will go. On this one, let's pull this one back out, because I didn't want to use one of the templates, because I don't really want it, it's not really a themed bag. I've put a self-cover button on the front. I've got a 10-inch strip of lace and I've just gathered it into a circle, and then I've sewn the self-cover button on top to finish it off. So again, I'll be finishing this soon to show you, and I'll just show you some bag handles which I've made. So you've got a choice with your bag handles. You can either just cut, this is a 5" by 30" piece of fabric which I've put wadding on one side, and I've folded it in half. I've stitched it all round, and there's a gap in the middle for turning. Turn it right sides out. You can get pokey tools for poking things right sides out. I just, in theory, I just use a pair of large scissors and poke it out. Okay, and then just top stitch around the edge, and then this will just sew on the edge of the bag, and then you can put some like little feature buttons on the side. So for the foxy one, I've got some foxy buttons that I'll sew on. So again, I'll show you those when I've finished it. And then I've put a little doggy button on the front of my applique on the front of the bag. So far I've made some kits for this bag, but I haven't got as far as doing the other ones yet because all this new Moda fabric came in, which is why I made this bag. So all this is like hot off the press, ready for my Facebook Live this weekend. It turned up at the beginning of the week, 5 huge boxes of Moda Three Sisters fabrics, which I have chopped several thousand pieces of fabric this week, and that's the mini charm pack for that. So there's like 76 charm pieces in that mini charm pack, and I've cut big charm packs and candy bars and all sorts of stuff. However, that's by the by. If you wanted to make the whole bag and the handles, so I've done the handles in the foxy one, I've pieced them, and then I've just put a plain-ish strip on the back. You're going to need 90 squares if you want to do the whole thing. So if you want to do the front, the back, the sides and the bag handles with squares, you're going to need 90. So most of the bags I've done, there's a variation somewhere where I haven't used the squares, so I've got away with using 2 mini charm packs on them all. So that is today's demo. I don't think I've forgotten anything. I will be back with another demo. Here, sit back so I'm not the headless woman. I'll be back with another demo to make the Be Happy bag and little needle book. I'll do that as well, so that if you're buying the pattern or the kits, you know how to put it together. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the lovely weather, and I'll see you again soon. Ta-ta, bye.